There are moments in The Living Remain where you find yourself saying, oh crap, and that's a good thing. That's what we should expect out of any zombie game. If you're new here, welcome to my channel and to this review of The Living Remain, an action-adventure zombie RPG. Hit the thumbs up and subscribe for VR in general, but without further ado, let's get into this review. So, The Living Remain is a story-driven zombie survival game that leans hard into familiar territory. If you've ever played Arizona Sunshine, you'll get some nostalgia here. That same mix of post-apocalyptic grit, human moments, and horde-slaying energy is alive and well, with a slightly more serious undertone. You play as Grant, a former soldier navigating a zombie apocalypse in search of his family. I mean, that setup alone already gives the game a stronger emotional hook than most zombie shooters. Just like in Arizona Sunshine though, you can expect to be mowing down the undead. And the story here is just as much a driving force for your playtime as the gameplay. We'll talk later about the impact voice dialogue has on the game later in the video, but the pacing of this game feels pretty good. It never felt like I was jumping from one level to another for the sake of more zombies. The pacing is tight, and while the path through the levels feel almost too linear, it never felt like a chore. You're always moving towards something, and that forward momentum keeps things from getting stale. As far as themes go, this game is on Arizona Sunshine's level, opting for a more serious approach as opposed to a pained below the comedic surface feel. Now let's talk about the mechanics, because this is where the game's quirks really show. Some are good and some are a little less polished, but it's all worth talking about. First off, the puzzles are an absolute highlight in this game. In a time of zombie games that are mainly about how quickly you can get off some headshots, this game makes you think. There are no bright, glowing identifiers here. The game expects you to look around, piece things together, and use your brain to solve puzzles. A truly wild concept, all things considered. Seriously though, too many games treat puzzles like preschool activities, so I can appreciate this approach. Again, you're expected to use your brain, and make no mistake, these puzzles are not obvious. If and when you finally solve them on your own, you'll either end up feeling proud that you outbrained a bunch of dead NPCs, or frustrated with how not obvious the solutions are sometimes. Don't feel bad if you end up in that second camp though, because some of these puzzles stray a little too far into the unintuitive zone. You know, that zone where the solution works in a game logic kind of way, but makes zero sense in reality. Yes, this is a game, but as a side note, VR is supposed to break down some of these boundaries, and these moments in particular do not. But let's shift gears and talk about physics, because this game nails that. Grabbing and interacting with objects feels great. Honestly, it gave me some light Half-Life Alyx vibes, especially when it comes to how responsive objects are being moved around by other objects. Items behave as expected and placements feel natural. Occasionally, sure, your hands might get stuck if you're reaching for something tucked out of sight, but considering this was made by a two-person team, the current state of the game is nothing short of impressive. Of course, no zombie shooter is good if the zombie shooting itself is terrible, so let's talk about the combat. You may hear a lot of reviews like this one likening this game to Arizona Sunshine, and yeah, it takes pages straight out of Arizona Sunshine's homework. You've got floating holsters on your body for weapons and a visible ammo pouch at your waist. Where things got a little weird for me though, ammo is grabbed from your shoulder even though ammo is displayed right in front of you at your waist. That disconnect made reloads feel awkward to me, requiring me to consult my immersion scientist on the optimal way of retraining my muscle memory. It's a bit clunky and a bit unintuitive, but definitely awkward. But at least headshotting zombies is as fun as you'd expect. Most zombies drop in one hit if you aim right, but not every undead customer is expecting traditional currency in this game. I ran into more than a few tanky zombies that acted like they were auditioning for the next superhero movie, legit eating bullets for breakfast with no milk. It keeps things tense, but occasionally feels like a little too much. But then there's the crafting and upgrade system, which is kind of genius in its own way. You use this pretty sick 3D printer to build and upgrade your gear. The resource you need for that is filament, and thankfully it's scattered around the maps in decent supply. This system makes sense mechanically and immersively, while adding a layer of progression that doesn't feel tacked on. The mechanics in The Living Remain aren't flawless by any means, but there's a lot to love here. Between clever puzzles and a relatively immersive upgrade system, there's fun to be had for sure. Graphics-wise, The Living Remain sits in that sweet spot above average. It's a decent visual experience, especially considering how many physics-based interactions can happen at one time. I played with most settings just under max and didn't run into a single stutter. That's a pretty impressive feat, especially when other VR devs are struggling with this same problem on less complicated games. Most of the surfaces and environments look alright too, not jaw-dropping by any means, but nothing stood out in a way that pulled me out of the experience either. The visuals here do what they need to do and the world itself feels lived in. It's really impressive how lower quality assets are tucked away or designed in a way that don't really catch your attention. Well, they usually don't catch your attention. Being real here, the cars in this game look absolutely terrible, but this is something I've noticed in every VR game I've played so far. Also, this combat knife looks like it came from an entirely different game. It looks rough to say the least, but I got the impression the developers had bigger priorities. On that note, let's talk about the lighting because darker areas in this game are dark. This footage is deceiving because inside the headset, almost everything outside the flashlight's illumination is invisible. Lighting sets a vibe for zombie games, and this is a solid vibe. Dimly lit and even brighter environments have that creep factor you'd expect from an apocalypse too. Now, the zombies themselves, they aren't the best dressers and they probably smell terrible, but they don't actually look bad, in a manner of speaking. They're convincing enough to make you nervous, and that's a good bar to meet in any zombie game. But I think that's enough about graphics because we need to touch on the audio, which most of the sound effects in this game are pretty good. Gunfire is relatively quiet when compared to real firearms, but I assume this is to spare our eardrums during the horde attacks. Otherwise, the effects like steam hissing out of pipes feels somewhat realistic, and the way sounds hit your ears just feels super well done in general. Something that stood out was how voices coming through speakers and radios actually sound like they're coming from the device. Many games do this, but for some reason it was much more noticeable in this title. Now, I said most of the sound design works, and I meant that. There are a few weird moments that break the illusion of immersion. Some areas of the game play the exact same sound every single time you walk by specific spots, and it's usually that zombie bone snapping noise. You know, the one that sounds like bubble wrap. The first few times it was legit creepy, but after realizing what was going on, it became more of an auditory inconvenience than something that keeps you on edge. Well, it's either that or I was unknowingly stepping on glass, and if that's the case, disregard what I just said. To be fair here though, regardless, it remains somewhat creepy enough for me to turn around every time. But I have to talk about my biggest gripe with this game, something that hurt the story part of this experience quite a bit for me. Look, I respect the grind. This game was made by a two-person team, and nobody's expecting blockbuster level performances, but the voicing just doesn't hold up to the quality of this game's writing. The dialogue itself is pretty well written, and feels believable, and makes sense for the characters, but the delivery often feels flat or unnatural.
I didn't spend a lot of time at home. Becky, my wife, she begged me to stay.
There's a difference between indie charm and taking you out of the moment, and unfortunately this leans more towards the second one. It's a shame too because the story has real potential to hit emotionally. Still, credit to the overall atmosphere the audio in this game helps build because it's pretty good. But moving on to the options and UI, it lands in a pretty comfortable spot, same as the graphics, being above average. Let's start with the options menu because there's more going on here than you might expect from a game made by two people. You're not getting anything flashy here, but functionality is always an expectation, and it definitely delivers. Especially if you're playing on PC, this game gives you a surprising amount of control over the graphics in particular. You can tweak everything from render scale to the quality of individual effects like shadows, and these changes make a noticeable impact. Cranking this setting up sharpens everything, and even with it cranked up, the game still ran incredibly smooth. This is impressive because this isn't something you see often in physics-heavy VR titles. Now, on the flip side, this game doesn't include a vignette option, the one that helps reduce motion sickness by giving you tunnel vision. In most games, I'd call that a miss. But in darker, survival-style titles like this one, it's kind of an expectation. I remember Metro Awakening had a subtle vignette that couldn't be turned off at all, and once I noticed it, it was somewhat annoying. But the devs are clearly leaning into immersion, which makes sense for the genre, but if you get sick in VR easily, your mileage may vary here. What I do appreciate though is the seated gameplay option. Always love seeing this option available. Having that flexibility makes a big difference for accessibility and for those of us who work jobs requiring lots of standing and movement. But let's talk about the UI and user interface real quick because this part's a bit more of a mixed bag. Opening your menu is handled either by a button on your controller or the more immersive option of simply tapping your wristwatch. I'm always going to be a fan of immersively integrated menus in VR, but there's a catch here because when you open the menu, the game freezes for a second. It's not incredibly long, but it's enough to feel jarring, especially on a platform designed to keep you locked in. Also, the user interface on the 3D printing upgrade station mentioned earlier is pretty good in concept. It has this usable screen, and visually it fits the vibe, if not a bit too futuristic compared to the rest of the game. Unfortunately, there is a lack of feedback when you try selecting something that isn't available. It's not always clear if your tapping is actually doing anything. Some subtle audio or visual cue would go a long way in making that feel more intuitive, but it's pretty cool otherwise. But as a whole package, this is one of those VR games you'll either love or hate. The game will either turn you away with the small problems or quietly earn your respect the longer you play it. It's got that indie charm, but also enough polish in the right places to make it stand out from the pack. The theme is focused with an actual reason to exist beyond stringing missions together. Mechanically, this game stands out with the difficulty of the puzzles and smooth object physics. Visually, it's not mind-blowing, but it's smooth and consistent. With the audio, lackluster voicing hurt the emotional impact, but for the most part, that was my only major gripe. And as for the options in UI, you've got real control over how the game looks and runs, which is always a win. That said, I'll flash the scores on the screen for you here. If you're looking for your next VR zombie game, you could do much worse, and this one has earned my respect. Try it out yourselves before or after you check out some of my other videos, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video and subscribe for weekly VR content. A company was actually kind enough to send a small YouTuber like me a VR gun stock, and I've never tried one, so you'll get a real first impression on that soon. But thanks for watching.